One of the reasons that CEP dug deep with this particular cut on its data is that it had found and summarized in an article called Luck of the Draw in the Stanford Social Innovation Review that in fact program officer performance varied within foundations. So whereas we might think that the foundation is responsible for creating the environment in which we can have solid and effective relationships with our grantees. In fact, the onus is also on us as program officers. So to that extent, they developed a series of predictors that they have used to measure, and your score coming out in the top 20% was across 4 categories. And the first one was the imperative for a program officer to understand the organization's goals and strategies. And one of the insights you shared with me was about moving beyond just a conversation with the executive director. Tell me about that.
It's recently dawned on me that it's very helpful if I have the opportunity to also meet and have some conversations with key staff members, and where possible, have conversations with a board chair or an executive committee. It rounds out my picture of the organization, and it also rounds out the organization's understanding of what the foundation's interest is in the organization and what the foundation hopes to achieve through funding.
Interesting. The second category is helpfulness within the selection process and the mitigation of pressures to modify priorities. How do you help grantees when you look at their request, and if it happens to deviate from the sense you have of what the organization might need, that could be seen as pressuring them as the key that you don't want to pressure. How do you do that balance? Is that part of the art form?
It is a delicate thing, Susan. Perhaps as a grant officer, I err on the side of deferring to the grantee, in that a grantee organization has developed a lot of time, we hope, clarifying its mission, testing its programs and approaches. And the power dynamic with the foundation is such that if the foundation even hints that the organization should modify, in most cases, I think the organization will defer to the pressure because it's so difficult to find funding. And that's where I really, really try to avoid that negative aspect of the power dynamic.
So do no harm.
Exactly. I mean, a grant should not do any harm. I think a grant that pressures an organization to modify what it's doing could really do some harm to an organization.
So it's a sensitivity to that helps you in that area.
Exactly. I mean, of course, it's also true that it's important for a grant officer to say to an organization, I'm wondering if you have considered, if for example, it's clear they're not aware of best practices, or if they're not aware there's another organization doing this same thing. I mean, obviously a grant officer has a responsibility to share that, but to me, sharing that kind of perspective or information is different than asking a grantee to modify who they are or what they're doing.
And does that negotiation differ based on the depth of relationship that you have with the grantee? Can you do that out of the box with a first-time grantee? How does the period of time or the depth of relationship relate to that negotiation?
I think the depth of the relationship is key there. I just think the kind of trust that can develop over time, because the organization's leadership and the grant officer have had multiple conversations, that's clear that the grant officer understands the organization and the success it's having, that makes all the difference. That kind of relationship of trust, then it becomes possible, I think, for the grant officer to say, I'm wondering if you would consider taking something like this on, or I'm wondering if you would consider talking to this other organization and providing them some assistance. I think that it's that trusting relationship that's key. And there the request is more in the sense of, we know your work, we know your capacity, we know there's this need. What do you think about doing XYZ? That's different than saying, you can have this grant if, which I would stay away from.